So we've all heard of the money pit, the car that is just a constant drain on our finances. So in this video, we're just going to look at the money pit, the traps that people fall into when they buy a car that just results in an emptying of their bank account. This lovely fun project or this fun car that you thought you were buying and you've regretted the decision of buying it. So in this video, we're going to look at the idea of buying a restoration project or buying a project to do up and increase its performance. We're also going to look at the day-to-day running costs of cars and those inevitable bills that crop up as cars age and they start failing, and just help you to have the factors to consider when you think about maybe scrapping the car and moving on, or keeping the car and going through those repairs yourself and being able to keep that car on the road. So the first area we're going to look at is the old restoration project, where someone buys an old car with a view to restoring it to its former glory, or they buy a project car. Perhaps they buy the standard family version of a car and their plan is to take it up to the performance levels of the performance variant. We see that latter one quite a lot in our forums, where people have bought a car but they want to take it up to the level of the performance variant. Now, first of all, I have to say that the cost of upgrading every component so it meets the performance variant is far more than just going out and buying that performance variant. But let's face it, most of us are rather skint. We don't have much money, so it can be quite appealing to get a cheap older car and bring it up to more modern specs over the years as we gradually start investing money in it. But in the long run, it will cost more money than just saving up and buying what we were aiming at in the first place. You'd probably also argue that that's taking the fun out of doing a project, and there's certainly merits to that argument. You learn so much when you start working on a car, and if you've got a project, all you've really got to lose is time and money. So if you're getting something from the experience and you're enjoying it, then by all means go for it. So with the older car, the restoration project, there's often little hidden traps that you can fall into with those. There's often hidden structural rust. So you start taking things apart and then things start breaking. That's just the nature of working with old cars. Everything is brittle. The nuts and bolts have all started to rust together. So doing anything on an older car is generally more hassle than working on a newer car. Also, if that older car has been looked after and been properly serviced, you'll have less work to do bringing it up to a modern spec or a modern standard or fully restoring it. But in a lot of cases, these old restoration projects have been sitting around for a long time and they've started to degrade already. Time is not very kind to cars, which are predominantly made of metal, which does deteriorate fairly quickly when exposed to the atmosphere. So the next area that proves to be a money pit or a money trap is really just a car that has high running costs. You buy the car you want a nice performance car, and you've stretched yourself a little bit. Maybe you've even got a loan in order to finance the car. And then after a year of ownership, you start to find that your pockets are completely empty. You've got no more money to spend on the car. So what happens? What goes wrong here? Well, you set yourself a budget. So for argument's sake, let's say 8,000, because I've just been looking through the local auto trader with 8,000 in mind, just to see a couple of options that might be tempting to me. So the first option I found was a 2014 Audi A3, which, let's face it, is the sensible option. It's got the 1.4 TFSI engine. You know I'm a fan of that. I know a lot of people have their own favourite cars, but that really was available for this budget. And then you start looking at performance options, performance cars. I actually found a Porsche Cayenne, which is a 4.8 litre engine, which puts out about 405 horsepower for the same money. So straight away, you're starting to think, well, I'd rather be driving around in that nice Porsche than driving around in an Audi A3. But let's think for a minute about that decision. If you look at the running costs of the car, so firstly, the car insurance will cost a lot more. And then you've got all the other ancillaries. So it's good when you're pricing this up just to factor in typical things that you will probably need to do over the space of 4 years. So a set of tyres, a complete set of brakes and pads, a cam belt change, and a clutch change. So hopefully you can get away with some of those items on some of these cars. But if you factor it in, you've got a benchmark. So you may get away with not having to replace the clutch, for example, but you may find the shock absorbers need replacing. But just factoring in those big costs is quite a varied selection of costs in there. And then add on to that the cost of servicing the car. So if you're servicing a 4-cylinder petrol engine, you've potentially got 4 spark plugs, 4 coil packs that will eventually need to be replaced. replaced. If you've got an 8-cylinder engine, straight away the cost of those components is double, and they probably cost more per unit than they would on that Audi A3. So it's just a good exercise to sit down with a bit of paper and just research those costs, add them together. Is that within your budget? If it is, then go for it. Get that nice car you've always wanted. If it's not, the option might be to go for a slightly older, cheaper version of that car and have a little bit of wiggle room money that you can spend on the servicing costs and the general running costs. So aside from the everyday running costs, there's other bills that crop up with owning a car, and you do get day-to-day breakdowns, day-to-day problems that need fixing. So when do you decide that your car needs to be scrapped and get rid of it? Because there's a tendency to hang on to your car. You know your car, you feel that you owe it something, and that mistake has cost me a lot of money in the past. So just look at the value of the car. First of all, you need that baseline. How much would it cost to replace your car with the same age, the same mileage? And that will give you an idea of fair market value for your car. So if the cost of repairs is getting close to that fair market value, you've got to question whether it's worth investing that money when you could buy another car that's potentially got less problems, it's been better looked after, and you won't have all the other things cropping up. Also factor in the things that you're likely to need to do in the next 12 months. So do the brakes need replacing soon? Is it due a cam belt change? I had a car, it was an Audi 2-litre TDI. It needed a cam belt change to be done as well. The shock absorbers were starting to wear. I'd already replaced 4 springs. I'd just bought a set of new tyres on it, and the turbocharger was starting to go. I was getting that whining siren noise that you get when the turbo starts to die. So I really just had to look at that and think, if I fixed all of that, it would cost more than it would be to go out and just replace that car again. So I got rid of that car and I started again, and I saved myself a lot of hassle and a lot of extra expense. So when a car's getting to that age and you've got that quantity of bills already looming, there's probably some other things that will also need doing as well. So it's usually best to just cut your losses and run. There is a big emotional attachment to our cars though, so you really do need to do the sums, do the paperwork, get it all written down, and make a decision based on the cold, hard facts rather than that emotional attachment that you have for your car. And sometimes scrapping the car or dismantling it and selling it for parts will raise more money, and you can put that towards your replacement car. So I know a few people who've made money just buying cars, dismantling them and selling the parts. The catch is you really need an area to store the parts that you've stripped off, and an area that you can use to actually dismantle the car. But other than your time, you're not losing very much, and you'll probably get better value out of what is left of your car than you would going to a scrap merchant and getting them to take the whole car. And in the end, there's usually something left over. So if you've been really efficient, it's literally just the chassis. But the scrap merchant will generally give you a scrap metal price for what is left, and then you'll be shot of that potential money pit. So I really want to see people spending money wisely when it comes to cars. There are so many people that get caught in this treadmill of having to spend out money, and a little bit of forethought, a little bit of planning at the beginning could have made all the difference and just saved them from entering this cycle of having a car which is like a vampire drain on their own finance. Just sitting down and doing the calculations before you begin can save you getting on this treadmill and losing all of that money in the long run. So I hope this video has been useful to you. Please boot that like button. That really does help us to get out there. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. We'd hate you to miss out on all the content that we're putting out. And I've lined this video up for you that you should find really interesting. Thanks for watching. See you in this next video.